Welcome to this week's edition of Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Chieh-Cheng. The peace and security in the Taiwan Strait has been receiving a lot of attention from all over the world. However, with the rise of China, the military balance in the Taiwan Strait has been facing a lot of challenges. So how do we read the future prospects of the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait? Joining us today is Dr. Alex Huang, who is currently director of the Institute of American Studies at Tamkang University. Dr. Huang, welcome to our program.
It's my pleasure.
The U.S. Pentagon just released the latest report on the PLA's military power. Mm-hmm. How do you read the report?
I think this is an extension of last year's report. I try to compare, and I keep all the reports and try to make some comparative studies. And I think the theme remained the same, but they also offer some new information.
What are the most important new information that we had to pay attention to?
I think the most one was an extension of last year's argument, is that China now have the power projection capability that can project its firepower, if not manpower, together beyond Taiwan. So China is now not only a threat to Taiwan's security, but to the regional security. And I think that's the area that we need to look at it.
What are the major strategic objectives of the PRC?
Well, it's hard to say. If we focused on the military side, I would say their objective is to develop a kind of capability that we call anti-access or aerial denial. Anti-access means that you make sure that your force or your firepower can project to a distance that the enemy force would think more than twice whether to get into your firepower range. So they won't have the access to the mainland or your territory. Area denial as well. China now has developed particularly many weapon systems and platforms to function that kind of mission, to make sure that Allied forces or the United States forces and other forces operating in the Asia-Pacific region would have many concerns before they get into the area.
Yeah. Early this year, China launched a missile shooting down one of its satellites. Is that a serious concern for the United States?
You know, this is a difficult answer because my answer would be yes and no. Yes, because it is a concern that China is developing the anti-satellite capability, that they can shoot down their own satellite, but leaving a lot of room for people to imagine that probably they will shoot down other people's satellite. So the answer is yes. No, because when we talk to professionals, because the so-called obsolete satellite it's a weather satellite that of China's their own. It's a low orbit satellite. It's not far away. The China's technology probably so far can only hit the lower orbit satellite, and for those so-called spy satellites or military uses satellite, they are in very high altitude, and we don't have any proof that China can reach that level yet.
But isn't that true that in the long run China may develop that kind of capacity?
Oh yeah, I think it's maybe it's a political stupidity to raise the issue right now, before the summer game in Beijing. But I think probably there are more issues that we can talk about, whether their decision-making process or their military may have other thought. But overall, I would say this is a warning, a wake-up call for the United States and for the regional friends.
According to a report, is the military balance in the region, in the Taiwan Strait in particular, pretty much balanced so far, or is in a serious trouble?
Well, I would say that in terms of military balance, I think Taiwan lost the balance a long time ago. If we do the bean counting, that means how many tanks, how many ships. But so far we can maintain a balance. A balance is higher than the military balance. It's what I call a strategic balance, which counted not only the force balance, but also the posture balance. I think in this year's DOD report, on the Chinese military power, they have a specific column talk about the Chinese idea of 势, the posture.
Posture.
The posture, I think Taiwan has been able to use our own comprehensive power, not only military, but also diplomatic and other forces, and put together so can we maintain a posture that China will not or dare not to initiate an armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait.
Is there any time frame that pointed out by the report as to when the military balance in the region could be in trouble?
I think it's in the report they did talk about it, but I think it's very hard to measure. If we counted all the so-called forces of democracies, then it would be very hard for China to overcome. But if we just look at the cross-strait, I would say China has a growing power that increasingly threatening the entire region.
You point out the so-called forces of democracies. As we can see that the U.S.-Japan alliance is strengthening. How do you see the development of this bilateral relationship?
I think the United States has determined very early in the post-Cold War era, I would say before 1994, that the United States has decided that pointed at Japan or focusing on Japan as the most important ally to the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. So even without the missile crisis in 95 and 96, the United States and Japan would have their consolidation of their alliance. So I would say over the past 10, 15 years, the United States and Japan has further concentrate and consolidate their partnership and alliance, and that would be the cornerstone of the regional security.
In addition to the strengthening of ties between the U.S. and Japan, the U.S. also redeployed some of its forces in the region.
Right.
What are the policy implications of that kind of redeployment?
There are two kinds of arguments. Some people argue that the United States, unlike in Europe, that putting forward the missile defense system, but in Asia-Pacific region, it's like moving backward,
That's
like
right.
away from the DMZ or apart from Okinawa. But I think if anybody understands the very intrinsic spirit of revolution in military affairs and the high technology available today, that we all know that people can shoot a longer range in a shorter period of time. So I would say the strengthening of American facilities in Guam and moving some of the troops to northern Australia is a future-looking deployment. I think that's a positive sign, and it would not affect Americans' power projection capability.
But on the other hand, some people read it from a political perspective. In other words, by redeploying its forces in the region, the U.S. is also sending some political signals to regional countries such as South Korea and so on. Do you agree with that kind of evaluation?
Well, yes. This is the part that I think the United States, if not criticism, but I hope that the United States, especially Pentagon, needs to better inform friends and allies in the region. We all know that the United States is engaging in about 10-year-long of global posture realignment, that many troops overseas will be redeployed or moving back to the homeland. How does it work? And I think the positive side is that the United States try to consult with all the allied countries and make sure that they have mutual understanding. But downside is that the United States does not have official documents that publicly pronounce what they are going to do in the years to come. So this is the area that needs to be improved.
In addition to its consolidation of U.S. relationship with its traditional allies, the U.S. is also engaging China in all kinds of forms. How do you see the military engagement between the U.S. and China right now?
As you know so well, that the United States, there are at least two schools of thought. Some people consider that, the American forces will never become the comrades in arms with a dictatorship or a party-controlled army. So there is no points to do this military engagement, and especially when China tried to steal American technologies. The other school of thought considered that it is in Americans' interest to engage China to know better about your potential enemy. I think over time, in the past 15 years, as I observe it, I think they all concluded with an engagement policy that they need to understand more. They need to talk to the PLA officers. The better they know about PLA, the more that they engage, the better their interests are served.
Yeah, the PECOM seems to be very enthusiastic about this kind of military engagement. Do they differ from their friends or allies in Washington, D.C. in terms of engaging China?
Well, honestly speaking, I sense a kind of difference between PECOM, I mean, people in Hawaii and people in Washington, D.C. I think it's because that in Washington they make policy. They make major decisions. But people in PECOM, they are the warriors. They are the first line officer that would, go or rush to the scene should there be a situation. So I would say, in general terms, that PECOM people got more regional scenario or contingency concern, but Pentagon got more policy or long-term strategic concern. I don't see a real contradiction, but there are some minor differences, but I don't think it's a big problem.
As we know that the U.S. is hoping that this kind of military engagement could be in the way of reciprocity. In other words, maybe the U.S. would be invited to observe the military exercise in China and so on. Do you think that the so-called reciprocity is coming from the U.S., from the Chinese side?
Well, that has been a problem not only in the military engagement area, but in other areas. I think the United States so far, to my knowledge, has been very cautious of this reciprocity. The United States does not believe that China would open, or at least as open as the United States, to their facilities and command centers. I think we are not professional soldiers, but everybody knows that professionals, when they get into an area of that they are familiar with, they can immediately pick up something. So I think China has been very cautious, and in the DoD reports specifically talk about deception as part of China's strategic culture. So I don't think they have confidence to engage China with so-called reciprocity.
One strategic concept proposed by the U.S. Pentagon is the so-called hedging strategy. What does it mean by a hedging strategy?
Hedging is that I would say that they consider that China is hedging as well, or China is at a strategic crossroad. China needs to decide that they would be more responsible or they would be more hegemonic. And it depends on how neighbors look at China's development. That's, I would say, on the X. But if we look at the Y, I would say it's a speculation about China's rise, whether China will truly rise into a wealthy democratic country, or China cannot rise. China will be dragged down by its political system, a system that may not work 20 years down the road. So I think the hedging is that the United States tried to protect its own interests, understand that China has many possibilities, so they pray for the best and they prepare for the worst.
Okay. But some people say that the old thoughts has been gone in the States, especially the so-called neocon views about China. Do you think that kind of view about China is still there or is disappearing?
Well, I think the view will exist, but the height of the so-called neocon view is already past. I think there will be more engagement, calls. There will be more policy toward exchanges, especially the United States will engage in a presidential race. China may not be on the top line, but I think there will be a debate over approach, whether to engage more or be cautious. that has been that way for over 30 years, and I think it will continue to exist.
Now the U.S. is entering another election cycle.
Yes.
Do you think that China issue would be a hot issue during the campaign?
I don't think so. If we look at the Washington Post or New York Times in the past 18 months, how many times that China became a topic or an issue to be debated, mostly are environmental and energy, not necessarily the security side. So I would say maybe the 17th Party's Congress or a newer generation coming in or Olympics. But I don't think the United States presidential campaigners or campaign managers would advise the candidate to talk too much about China.
Yeah. Well, looking back, the U.S.-China relation seems to be improving, for the past, 5-6 years. But when you look at the relation between Taiwan and the U.S., there have been ups and downs, for the past few years. So when we come back, we'll talk about the relationship between Taipei and Washington.
Okay.
So stay with us. We'll be right back.